Today is not about anger or blame. It is about courage. The courage to recognize when a relationship is costing you more than it gives. The courage to step back, breathe deeply, and say, I choose myself. Because the life you are meant to live cannot fully begin until you create distance from what is slowly breaking you. Toxic people do not just make you tired, they slowly disconnect you from your purpose. This is one of the most dangerous effects because it happens quietly, almost invisibly. At first, you think you are just having a bad day, then a bad week, and eventually you begin to believe that something is wrong with you. But the truth is, when you are constantly surrounded by negativity, manipulation, jealousy, or emotional instability, your inner compass starts to malfunction. Your focus shifts from becoming who you are meant to be to merely surviving the environment you are in. Purpose requires clarity, and toxic people create confusion. They question your decisions not to help you grow, but to keep you doubting yourself. They minimize your dreams not because your goals are unrealistic, but because your growth threatens their comfort. Over time, you stop dreaming out loud. You stop sharing your ideas. You stop trusting your instincts. That is how purpose begins to fade, not through failure, but through constant discouragement disguised as concern. Energy can be restored with rest, but purpose, once neglected, takes much longer to recover. When toxic people dominate your emotional space, they demand your attention in unhealthy ways. You spend your mental energy replaying conversations, defending your intentions, explaining your boundaries, or fixing problems that were never yours to solve. That energy was meant to be invested in your calling, your creativity, your faith, your growth. Instead, it is drained into emotional chaos that produces nothing but stress and self-doubt. There is also a spiritual cost. Purpose thrives in environments of truth, encouragement, and alignment. Toxic people distort reality. They normalize dysfunction. They make disrespect feel ordinary and peace feel unfamiliar. Slowly, you begin to accept conditions that are far below what you deserve. And once that happens, you start settling not only in relationships, but in life. You accept less joy, less fulfillment, less hope, and less belief in what is possible for you. Another danger is how toxic people redefine love and loyalty. They teach you that love means endurance without limits, and loyalty means silence in the face of harm. When you internalize these ideas, you betray your own purpose. You stay in places that stunt your growth because leaving feels like failure. You confuse attachment with assignment, forgetting that not everyone who enters your life is meant to walk with you forever. Purpose is forward moving, but toxic relationships keep you emotionally stuck. While life is calling you higher, toxic people keep pulling you back into old patterns, old fears, and old versions of yourself. They remind you of who you used to be instead of supporting who you are becoming. That constant pull backward creates an internal conflict that drains motivation and weakens confidence. The most painful part is that toxic people often benefit from your loss of purpose. When you stop growing, stop shining, and stop stepping into your power, they feel safe. Your stagnation becomes their comfort zone. And if you are not careful, You will sacrifice your future just to keep someone else comfortable, just to avoid conflict, just to maintain familiarity, just to be accepted, just to belong. Every life is shaped by proximity, whether we acknowledge it or not. The people you spend the most time with quietly influence the direction your life takes, the standards you accept, and the limits you place on yourself. This is why proximity is never neutral. It either pushes you forward or pulls you backward. Destiny is not only determined by what you desire, but by who you allow close enough to shape your thoughts, emotions, and decisions on a daily basis. When you stay close to people who operate from fear, bitterness, or limitation, those qualities begin to feel normal. You may start strong, hopeful, and ambitious, but constant exposure to doubt and negativity wears down your vision. You begin to question possibilities you once believed in. You lower your expectations not because life demanded it, but because your environment slowly convinced you to. This is how proximity influences destiny, not through dramatic moments, but through repeated emotional exposure. People who lack purpose often feel threatened by those who have it. Instead of encouraging growth, they subtly discourage it. They may mock your discipline, question your goals, or remind you of past failures. Their words may sound casual, even joking, but repetition gives them power. Over time, you internalize those voices, and they begin to speak louder than your own inner truth. Eventually, you start making choices that keep you close to what feels familiar rather than stepping toward what is meaningful. Proximity also affects behavior. When you are surrounded by people who avoid responsibility, complain constantly, or settle for less, those habits can transfer to you without permission. You may find yourself tolerating mediocrity, justifying unhealthy patterns, or delaying necessary changes. Not because you are incapable of better, but because your environment does not challenge you to rise. Destiny requires momentum, and momentum is difficult to maintain when you are surrounded by people who are comfortable standing still. There is also an emotional cost. Being close to toxic or unaligned people creates constant inner tension. You feel pulled in two directions: who you are becoming and who they expect you to remain. That tension drains courage. It makes bold decisions feel risky and growth feel lonely. You begin to shrink your dreams to preserve relationships, choosing connection over calling, even when that connection is slowly suffocating your future. The truth is, not everyone deserves front row access to your life. Some people are meant to be lessons, not lifelong companions. When you keep people close who do not respect your boundaries or support your evolution, you limit how far you can go. Destiny often requires separation before elevation. It asks for the bravery to step away from what is comfortable in order to move toward what is purposeful. Choosing your proximity wisely is an act of self-leadership. It is recognizing that your future cannot be built in environments that undermine your growth. When you surround yourself with people who value integrity, growth, and accountability, your destiny begins to align naturally. Their presence reinforces your vision, strengthens your resolve, and reminds you of who you are called to become. In the end, Where you stand and who stands beside you will determine how far you are able to go. Peace is often misunderstood as something optional, something we can sacrifice temporarily for relationships, obligations, or appearances. But peace is not a luxury reserved for quiet moments or future rewards. It is a responsibility you owe to your own well-being. When you neglect your peace, everything else in your life begins to suffer: your clarity, your health, your confidence, and your sense of direction. Choosing peace is not about avoiding life's challenges. It is about refusing to live in constant emotional turbulence created by others. Many people stay in toxic environments because they believe endurance equals strength. They tell themselves that being patient, forgiving, or accommodating means tolerating chaos. But peace does not thrive in places where disrespect is normalized and boundaries are ignored. When you continuously expose yourself to conflict, manipulation, or emotional instability, your nervous system remains on high alert. Over time, this constant stress becomes your baseline, and you forget what calm actually feels like. Taking responsibility for your peace means recognizing that no one else will protect it for you. Toxic people rarely change because you are kind, understanding, or silent. In fact, your silence often gives them permission to continue. Peace requires discernment, the ability to identify what disrupts your inner balance and make conscious choices to limit its influence. This can be uncomfortable, especially when it involves setting boundaries or distancing yourself from people you care about. But discomfort is often the price of growth. There is also a false belief that choosing peace is selfish. Many people fear being labeled difficult, cold, or ungrateful if they prioritize their mental and emotional health. But neglecting your peace to keep others comfortable is a form of self-abandonment. You cannot pour into others when you are constantly drained, nor can you show up fully in your purpose when your mind is consumed by unnecessary turmoil. Peace allows you to hear your own voice again. In toxic environments, your thoughts are crowded out by criticism, demands, and emotional noise. You lose touch with your intuition and begin reacting instead of responding. When peace is restored, clarity follows. Decisions become easier. Confidence grows. You stop questioning your worth and start honoring it. This internal stability becomes a foundation for healthier relationships, better choices, and sustained growth. Responsibility also means understanding that peace requires maintenance. It is not a one-time decision, but a daily practice. You must consistently evaluate what you allow into your emotional space, conversations, environments, and relationships. Sometimes peace requires saying no. Sometimes it requires walking away. And sometimes it requires letting people be disappointed so you can remain whole. Choosing peace does not mean life becomes perfect or conflict-free. It means you no longer allow chaos to define you. It means you stop engaging in battles that cost you more than they give. Peace strengthens resilience, not weakness. It gives you the capacity to face challenges with clarity rather than exhaustion. When you accept peace as a responsibility, your life begins to change in subtle but powerful ways. You become more present, more grounded, and more aligned with who you truly are. You stop surviving and start living with intention. Peace becomes your standard, not your exception, and from that place, everything else begins to fall into alignment. Many people are taught that love means sacrifice without limits, that caring deeply requires enduring pain, silence, and emotional exhaustion. But love was never meant to erase you. Love does not demand that you destroy your sense of self to keep someone else comfortable. When a relationship consistently requires you to suppress your feelings, lower your standards, or ignore your well-being, what you are experiencing is not love, but obligation wrapped in familiarity. Real love supports growth rather than survival. It allows honesty without fear, boundaries without punishment, and individuality without guilt. Toxic relationships often distort this truth. They convince you that asking for respect is too much, that setting boundaries is selfish, and that choosing yourself is a betrayal. Over time, you begin to associate love with anxiety, confusion, and emotional labor. You stay because leaving feels cruel, even though staying is slowly breaking you. Self-destruction in the name of love happens quietly. It starts with small compromises, ignoring your intuition, excusing repeated behavior, tolerating disrespect, because you hope things will change. Eventually, those compromises become habits. You lose touch with who you were before the relationship demanded constant sacrifice. Your world shrinks. Your needs become invisible, even to yourself. This is how love becomes a place of loss rather than safety. There is a difference between patience and self-erasure. Patience allows room for growth and healing, but self-erasure silences your pain to preserve peace that is already broken. When you constantly give without receiving care, support, or accountability, imbalance takes over. You become responsible for holding the relationship together while the other person avoids change. This dynamic drains emotional strength and reinforces the belief that your worth lies in how much you can endure. Love that harms you is not noble. It is not virtuous to stay in situations that diminish your mental health, confidence, or joy. True love does not require you to abandon your boundaries or betray your values. It does not demand that you accept behavior that would never be considered healthy in any other context. When love costs you your peace, your voice, or your identity, the price is too high. Choosing yourself does not mean you never cared. It means you finally cared enough to stop the harm. Walking away from a destructive relationship is not a failure of love. It is an act of self-respect. It is acknowledging that you deserve relationships where your presence is valued, not exploited. Where love feels safe, supportive, and balanced, not draining and conditional. Many people fear that leaving toxic love means they will be alone forever. But loneliness is not measured by the absence of people. It is measured by the absence of understanding and safety. Staying in a relationship that erodes you creates a deeper loneliness than being alone ever could. Healing begins when you stop confusing attachment with love and start honoring your own well-being. When you accept that love does not require self-destruction, your standards rise naturally. You become more discerning, more confident, and more aligned with relationships that reflect mutual respect and care. Love becomes a source of strength rather than survival, and you reclaim the parts of yourself that were lost in the process of trying to be enough for someone who could never meet you where you stood. Growth is not accidental, it is intentional, and intention requires discernment. Without discernment, growth becomes delayed, distorted, or completely blocked. Many people desire progress in their lives, but they avoid the uncomfortable decisions that progress demands. Discernment is the ability to see clearly, to recognize what aligns with your values and what quietly works against them. It is not about judgment or superiority. It is about self-awareness and self-protection. Every opportunity, relationship, and environment carries an influence. Some influences nourish growth, while others slowly suffocate it. Without discernment, you may say yes to things that drain you, stay connected to people who undermine your confidence, or remain in situations that no longer serve your evolution. Discernment allows you to pause and ask whether something supports who you are becoming or keeps you attached to who you used to be. One of the greatest challenges to growth is familiarity. People often choose what feels comfortable over what is constructive. Discernment helps you separate comfort from alignment. Just because something is familiar does not mean it is healthy. Just because someone has always been in your life does not mean they should always have access to your future. Growth often requires releasing attachments that once felt safe but now limit your potential. Discernment also protects your energy. Growth demands focus, and focus cannot exist in constant emotional noise. When you lack discernment, you become reactive instead of intentional. You respond to every demand, every opinion, every crisis, until your energy is scattered and depleted. Discernment teaches you when to engage and when to step back, allowing you to invest your time and effort where it truly matters. There is a difference between being open-hearted and being unguarded. Discernment does not close your heart. It guides it. It helps you recognize patterns rather than isolated incidents. It allows you to see when behavior is consistent rather than accidental. Growth requires this clarity because repeated exposure to unhealthy dynamics can normalize dysfunction and slow your progress without you realizing it. Many people resist discernment because it forces difficult truths to surface. It may reveal that a relationship is one-sided, that a workplace is toxic, or that a habit is self-sabotaging. Facing these truths can be painful, but avoiding them is more costly. Growth cannot occur in denial. Discernment brings honesty, and honesty creates the foundation for meaningful change. Discernment also strengthens confidence. When you trust your judgment, you stop seeking constant validation from others. You make decisions with clarity rather than fear. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. This inner certainty allows growth to happen with less resistance and more consistency. As you grow, discernment becomes even more important. New levels bring new challenges, and not everything that looks like opportunity is meant for you. Discernment helps you recognize distractions disguised as progress. It keeps you aligned with your purpose rather than busy with activity that leads nowhere. Growth demands courage, But discernment gives that courage direction. It ensures that your efforts are not wasted on what drains you, but invested in what develops you. When discernment guides your choices, growth becomes sustainable rather than exhausting, and your life begins to reflect intention instead of reaction. Walking away is often framed as weakness, avoidance, or failure, but in reality, it can be one of the most powerful acts of self-respect a person ever makes. It takes strength to stay, but it takes a different kind of strength to leave when staying costs you your dignity, peace, and sense of self. Walking away is not about giving up on others. It is about refusing to give up on yourself. Many people remain in toxic situations because they fear how walking away will be perceived. They worry about being judged, misunderstood, or labeled as selfish. Society often praises endurance without questioning what is being endured. But self-respect asks a deeper question: at what cost? When a relationship consistently disrespects your boundaries, invalidates your feelings, or diminishes your worth, staying silently communicates that this treatment is acceptable. Walking away disrupts that narrative and affirms that your well-being matters. Self-respect is rooted in recognizing your value even when others fail to see it. Toxic people often rely on your tolerance to maintain control. They push limits, dismiss concerns, and test how much you are willing to accept. Each time you stay despite the harm, the cycle strengthens. Walking away breaks that cycle. It sends a clear message, not necessarily to them, but to yourself, that you deserve better than survival-level relationships. There is also grief involved in walking away. You are not only leaving a person or situation, you are letting go of hopes, expectations, and the version of the future you imagined. This grief can make walking away feel like loss rather than liberation. But loss does not always mean something valuable was taken from you. Sometimes it means something harmful no longer has access to you. Walking away requires honesty. It forces you to admit that love alone cannot fix everything, that effort must be mutual, and that boundaries are non-negotiable. This honesty can be uncomfortable because it removes excuses and exposes truth. Yet truth is where healing begins. You cannot heal in the same environment that caused the wound. Self-respect also means trusting yourself. When you walk away, you choose to believe your experiences rather than the explanations offered to minimize them. You stop questioning whether you are too sensitive or too demanding and start honoring what your emotions are telling you. This trust rebuilds confidence that may have been eroded over time. Walking away creates space. Space for clarity, for rest, for growth, and for healthier connections. It allows you to reconnect with parts of yourself that were neglected or silenced. In that space, you rediscover what peace feels like without constant tension, what joy feels like without guilt, and what freedom feels like without fear of backlash. It is important to understand that walking away does not require anger or resentment. It can be a calm, deliberate decision rooted in self-awareness. You can care about someone and still choose distance. You can appreciate lessons learned without remaining in the classroom. Self Respect is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, firm, and unwavering. When you choose to walk away from what harms you, you set a new standard for your life. You teach yourself that your needs matter, your boundaries are valid, and your peace is worth protecting. Over time, this act of self-respect reshapes how you show up in all areas of your life, influencing the relationships you choose, the opportunities you accept, and the way you treat yourself every single day.